Hello, lovely Fully Charged Show podcast listeners. It's Robert Llewellyn, and I'm speaking to you from sunny Sardinia, where I am slightly sad to point out there is not very much evidence of mass electric car adoption. I've seen a smattering of solar panels on the roofs of various luxury villas in Sardinia. That's on the coast. Inland, it's very poor country. It's not a wealthy place. It's obviously got an incredible amount of trillionaires that sail their massive diesel yachts around the coast, but it's not a wealthy country. But, considering how windy and sunny this magnificent island is, and the fact that it's an island, and the fact that it could easily power itself with wind, solar and connected electric vehicles, it's a reminder that we are on the very bottom end of the transition curve in the energy transition, blah-de-blah. Anyway, all that is not relevant to this podcast. And yes, I did fly here on a passenger jet. And yes, I will fly back tomorrow on another one. And yes, we are constantly working out how we can minimize our flights and maintain the coverage of developments around the world that Fully Charged is focused on. It's really complicated, and we're trying everything we can, including visiting mainland Europe by train and electric car. We've done that a lot recently, and it's a really good way of doing it, and using the services of people on the ground, for instance, in the United States of America, as we have been doing recently with the brilliant Chelsea Sexton. That reduces our carbon footprint by, Iceland. But my own personal carbon footprint is off the scale. It's a generational thing. It's my fault, and I'm not even going to try and make any excuses. That's it. I'm moving on for the time being, but please be as critical as you like, as I'm sure you can be, but I'm only going to accept any criticism from people under 20. Anyone over that age has flown on holiday to places, and I'm just not interested. Well, I am interested. Of course I am. Everyone's opinion is valid, unless you're my age, in which case we should really shut up. So in which case, why am I doing this podcast? In which case, it's an existential crisis. Moving on. I'm not here on vacation. I'd like to point that out. I'm not in Sardinia on vacation. I'm here to test drive the new Renault Zoe, and my report on that will be on Fully Charged very soon. Now, here's what I've been thinking about between going for long walks in the mountains and lounging by the pool. Okay, scratch the last one. I am rubbish at pool lounging. I have been doing some walks. Anyway, it's how electric cars have opened the conversation about the development and the thinking behind a completely different approach to powering our world. Yes, listeners, I really want to talk about batteries. Because as you will hear, they are an increasingly pivotal technology. Basically, solar panels do work. They last a long time and they are recyclable. Wind turbines do work. They last a long time and are recyclable. Later I will get to nuclear energy. It does work. It's very safe. It lasts a long time and it's incredibly expensive, and we don't know what to do with the waste, which is not currently recyclable. But there has been some very important news in the electric vehicle and renewable energy space, which seems to have slipped under the radar recently. Not altogether surprising, considering the tumultuous day-to-day upheavals we're seeing in certain parts of Europe and the USA. But I truly think these kind of developments can radically change the picture. So last week, Tesla announced plans to start building batteries next year that will be able to power a car for over 1 million miles. The batteries will last longer than the car. I've been saying it for quite a long time, but now it is really 100% true. Now, this isn't about increased range or faster charging. It's really about longevity. A group of battery researchers at Dalhousie University, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, I'm sure you'll tell me, which has an exclusive agreement with Tesla, published a paper in the Journal of the Electrochemical Society describing a lithium-ion battery that should be able to power an electric vehicle for over 1 million miles, losing less than 10% of its energy capacity during its lifetime. Now, just to put that in some kind of perspective, because if you've never driven an electric car, you go, well, I don't know what that means. If a car did, say, 300 miles on a charge when it was new, after driving 1 million miles, it would only manage 270 miles on a charge, which is pretty impressive after 1 million miles. I mean, that's extraordinary. So just to explain as best as I know how, current lithium-ion battery technology can be charged and discharged around 2,000 times before there is any measurable decrease in capacity, before you start to think, it's not very good anymore. 2,000 recharges and discharge. When I first heard that, I thought, that doesn't sound like very many times. Surely it's going to wear out in a couple of years. But then, after experiencing actually how many times I did charge the battery in a Tesla Model S, an average of 2 or 3 times a week over 4 years, then 2,000 recharges will last between 15 and 19 years. That is using current lithium-ion technology. That battery will power the car for approximately 500,000 miles before it needs to be removed, repurposed as a static storage device for the home, hospital, office, factory, where it will remain useful for another 10 to 15 years. No one is going to throw it away. This new battery technology that was announced by Tesla, described by the authors of the report as single crystal NMC 532/AG cell with optimized electrolytes, could in theory be charged over 6,000 times with minimal degradation, meaning it can power an electric vehicle for well over 1.6 million kilometers or 1 million miles and operate for at least 2 decades if used in grid energy storage, as many Tesla batteries are, as we know. If you don't know, there are lots of massive grid level Tesla batteries being installed around the world. Now, if you think about how we currently use cars and how long we keep them, a 1 million mile car or 1 million mile battery is way more than any one individual is probably going to be able to use. It would be nice to think that this will change and people will keep a car for 20 years instead of 3 or 4, which is the current average. But it also means a second-hand car with say 100,000 miles on the clock. The one thing you don't need to worry about if you buy a second-hand electric car with that kind of mileage is the battery. It's still got 900,000 miles of useful capacity left. But forget owning a car with a 1 million mile battery. If you can imagine it being used in a shared vehicle, something that charges maybe a couple of times a day, 3, 4, 5 times a day, and is used far more than a privately owned vehicle, then this kind of thing becomes, to use an annoying cliche, a game changer. I just want to remind myself, as well as you, wonderful listeners, that it was only 7 or 8 years ago that bellicose commentators happily pontificated about how we would throw the car batteries away after 2 or 3 years. I'm not going to mention any names. He doesn't need the publicity, but I think some of you, certainly in the British Isles, will know who I mean. Well, they were wrong then, and they are even more wrong now, and no one uses this argument in the never-ending tirade of criticism against electric vehicles. Now it's all about purchase cost and the availability of public charging. So better arguments than the ill-informed, we'll throw away the batteries after 2 years, and all electricity comes from burning coal. That was the balderdash that was stated just a few years back. I think this is how you can tell a new technology is genuinely going to change things, when the arguments against it are constantly having to change to keep up with developments. At the moment, batteries are seen as a vital part of a new energy economy. I'm not going to pretend I've never heard about this before. The insight that many engineers and researchers explained to me 10 years ago are coming to fruition at increasing speed. You know, when I first heard the theories, just literally theories about the notion of battery electric vehicles and how they were not just cars but mobile energy storage systems, and that the development of these cars would disrupt the energy industry just as much as the automotive industry, it did sound a bit far-fetched and sci-fi. It doesn't sound far-fetched anymore. It's happening right now, and it needs to happen very quickly. We need to prepare for a different world. And I'm not just talking about climate change, although clearly that's the key issue. I'm talking about energy availability. According to some very well-informed people, not some random bot on Twitter, I mean people who carry out actual research into these topics, we are now in a period of slow decline of resource availability. It's not, as Hollywood movies might like to portray, a sudden catastrophic collapse. You know, where there's one guy with a gun who's got to walk across America to save his daughter and kill loads of zombies. It's not that. It's more a slow change, a decades, even centuries-long gradual decrease in energy availability. Energy descent refers to the retraction of oil use after peak oil availability, or voluntary energy use reductions in response to the global climate crisis. The term peak oil, I mean, I've heard that bandied about for decades. I've never heard anyone agree when it was supposed to be, or when it might occur, or when it might have occurred. One thing is absolutely clear, though. There is wide agreement that the rate of discovery of new fossil fuel deposits peaked worldwide during the 1960s, and it has never approached those levels since. So we're talking close to 60 years ago was when we found the most new deposits of fossil fuels, and we haven't ever managed to beat that again. So what this means is there's loads of oil and coal on the planet. We're not going to run out, as some people predicted in the 1970s. Very few people think we should continue burning coal. I don't think it's going to require a massive global struggle to keep the coal in the ground. It's expensive, dirty and inefficient. It's a dead technology, regardless of all the clean coal advocates. I mean, really, let's just forget about that. But oil and gas are a very different matter, and it's where that oil is that is increasingly a problem for the big oil companies. It used to be in the middle of a farm in Texas, or in the middle of a desert in Saudi Arabia. Now it's in the middle of an ocean miles from the coast, or in the Arctic, or we have to frack the ground by pumping toxic chemicals at incredible pressure to try and release a bit of gas. It is desperate, tragic, and incredibly short-sighted. Oil prices are currently at rock bottom. It's an incredibly fragile energy system that we all rely on. The slightest disruption can send entire economies into a tailspin. People of my generation remember it. It was called the 1970s oil crisis, and suddenly there wasn't any petrol at the petrol station. And believe me, that had a big impact. Thankfully, I was riding a push bike at the time, so I didn't really mind. Anyway, the only thing that the oil price can do at the moment is go up. We are horrendously dependent on forces beyond the control of any individual company or government. That is why we need alternatives, and thankfully they're getting more reliable, cheaper and ubiquitous. And what about nuclear? I only mention this because of a recent announcement that momentarily bipped up in the deafening cacophony of Brexit and Trump news. So, okay, bear with me for a moment. Imagine yourself now, you're in a very smart suit, you're very slim and young and French, you're very, very sophisticated, and you're in the boardroom of the EDF energy company, the French energy giant, and you are discussing the problems you're facing building Hinkley Point C, the huge nuclear power plant in Somerset in the lovely British Isles. Your staff scan the news feed. The UK is going into political meltdown. The Prime Minister tricked the Queen. Trump did something on a phone. Everyone is either outside the Houses of Parliament or outside the White House, and they're all blathering on, and it's enormous, massive news blitz. It's just unbelievable. And then the CEO of EDF Energy, Monsieur Jean-Bernard Lévy, he stands up and says, "The timing is perfect. Send out the press release about Hinkley Point C." So the press release is sent out, which states quite clearly, and you're going to love this, that the cost of building the new power station has increased. Whoa! Who would ever have predicted that? And this is not the total cost. I'll come to that in a minute. It has increased by 2.9 billion pounds, not euros, not dollars, pounds. That's about $3.5 billion. That's the increase. The total cost is now well in excess of 22 billion pounds. And the reason behind this, and remember, this is a massive building project that is employing thousands of contractors, surveyors, designers, civil engineers, nuclear scientists, the list goes on and on. A lot of planning. And it's on a site that they've been developing for decades. And at this late stage, they have decided it's going to cost a little bit more. As they've stated in the press release, they face, and I quote, "challenging ground conditions which made earthworks at the site more expensive than we expected. Hello, it's Bob the Digger Man here. I faced a lot of challenging ground conditions when I dug out the foundations of my house. I hadn't had a seismic survey done. I hadn't spent hundreds of thousands of quid paying surveyors to check the site. I just got in my digger and wreaked havoc. But I was building a small office, not a massive power plant on the coast. Challenging ground conditions, you don't say. Well, obviously, that's going to add the best part of 3 billion quid to the cost. This is so outrageous and entirely predictable. The cost of building this massive white elephant is an utter disgrace. And the decision to release this tiny update to their already hugely delayed and overcost project during the biggest political crisis in my lifetime in the British Isles is nothing short of derisory. They think we are mugs. They think we're idiots. They think we're stupid and we haven't got a clue. This is offensive, brutal, calculated and unforgivable action by this company. If we had a government, do you remember them? They were great. Then the only option is to say to EDF and their Chinese backers, "Fond ton crochet." I can say that even better. "Fond ton crochet," which is your actual French for sling your hook. We should stop now, get them to pay to clear up the site, spend the excess 2.9 billion on offshore wind, which, strange as it may seem, would generate just over 2 gigawatts, which is only a little less than Hinkley Point C may, one day, in about 2030 or 2035, be able to generate. Of course, I haven't said how much the electricity will cost that Hinkley Point C will generate. No one is arguing about that. It will be the most expensive electricity ever generated in the British Isles from any source. And where will the profits go? It's best not to ask. Just keep your mental health going. Take back control, my bottom. Anyway, so this underlines the fact that regardless of what I say or what Greta Thunberg says or what the massed ranks of angry climate change denialists and their wealthy and influential paymasters say, we're going to have to change the technology we use. This is the driving point behind what Fully Charged is all about. And I have to remind myself all the time, because in the day-to-day decision making on the minutiae of which car to review, which new solar system is working best, how the big is the biggest wind turbine, how massive is the most massive grid battery. The overarching drive is to find ways to live in relative comfort without wrecking the delicate balance of the small blue dot we inhabit. Anyway, I could rant for hours about Hinkley Point C, but that's all I've got time for. I've got to go and test drive a new electric car, the Renault Zoe, which, just as a matter of interest, was launched in 2012 with a 22 kilowatt hour battery. Well, no big deal there. But the new one I'm about to take around Sardinia has a 52 kilowatt hour battery that is the same physical size as the original, with over double the energy density. That's happened in, I've got to now work out 12, how long ago 2012 was. I didn't work this out before I started talking. 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 7 years ago. So in 7 years, battery capacity has way more than doubled. That is extraordinary. Like I say, things are developing fast, so please do subscribe to this podcast and please do that review thing in your favorite podcast distribution device, whatever app you use. If you give us lots of stars on your review, then more people find the podcast. We've got an amazing audience already and it is growing, but that really helps. Please don't forget to take a look at the cornucopia of episodes of Fully Charged on the old YouTubes. And of course, I really want to thank our fabulous Patreon supporters who have been so incredibly reliable and solid and have backed us for years. And it's, humbling, really is. And we're just incredibly grateful for that, because I know we say it all the time and it is boring, but we could not do this without you. So it is absolutely brilliant. Please do subscribe to Fully Charged Show on YouTube and all that stuff. I don't even know why I say it. But of course, as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.